Hi everybody, Happy New Year's and welcome to Missy's Imaginings. I hope that you had a good Christmas. Things are doing well here. I have a different light on because it's raining, so though that is the norm that people think of when they think of Oregon, we haven't had as much rain as we've needed. So it's a good thing that it's raining, but not quite enough light out. But it is a relief that the mountains will get the rain they need and the snowpack might come and all that good stuff. So I hope things are well in your neck of the woods. I thought today we would go ahead and put together one of the pattern sets that I made for the 12 Gifts of Christmas. So I did the pattern set for the SD size, this size, for the shirt, dress, and leggings. And then I was curious to see if I could simply scale that down on a printer or a copier and how it would fit. So I went ahead and did that. So I reduced it 75% of the original size. I measured some measurements from the doll and then some measurements from a Tonner Wilde Imagination Ellowyne Wilde doll. And thought, okay, it's going to be sort of okay. So I went ahead and reduced that to 75%. So that's what we're going to put together today. So I have all the pieces cut out. We're going to do the shirt dress in red and the leggings in houndstooth. And I have not made any other alterations to this pattern. So I thought that way we could sew the MSD size and then we'll try it on Ellowyne. I was curious because the proportions are different from the SD size to the Ellowyne size. And let's see, I'll grab one. This is the Ellowyne Wilde body. This is a Prudence, so it's a different head, but the body is the same. So she has a wider waist compared to the dimensions of like the Antoinette and the Tonner that are hello behind the wig. And so it's more of a, like a junior miss figure, I guess is what they call. And I don't know why they categorize these figures so much, because any age can have any shape, you know. But anyway, more of what you'd think of a youthful figure as opposed to the very hourglass figure. And her legs, proportionately to her height, are shorter than on a BJD SD, how long their legs are compared to their height. So when I reduced the pattern that was drafted from the Huron, the legs, and of course there is a fold because it needs a casing, but the legs are going to be long on this doll. But I didn't want to cut them off because I'm curious to see how they will look on the Evangeline by Wilde Imagination. So that's why I did not cut them and adjust them to the doll, because that way I can let people know if they want to use this pattern for Evangeline. I'm thinking it might work. And I did not cut the sleeves either. So what we're going to do is put this together. Now before I start, and I just had some extra fabric, so I'm going to do just a little scarf out of the houndstooth that will draw the outfit together so it'll look finished when it's done. But I'm going to go ahead and do my regular prep sewing, which many of you who've watched the videos, you know kind of what I'm talking about. But for anyone who's new, you veterans, bear with me. When I prep sew, that just means a lot of the things that need to be put together before I can actually assemble the garment, I'm going to go ahead and do that. For instance, the facing, I'm going to go ahead and sew the facing together at the shoulders. So it will look like that with the neckline all on the inside. And then once that's sewn, I'm going to serge around this outer edge. Now you can use a serger machine, like an overlock machine, or you can zigzag. I've just found that on doll clothing, I like to avoid as much bulk as possible, so I don't usually hem the facing because it just creates another layer of fabric when you fold that over. So instead I serge that, or you can zigzag it. So I'm going to go ahead and put the facing together. Then on the sleeves I will go ahead and serge the hem and then turn that up and hem the sleeves. So there I'm going to go ahead and hem it because I want a finished hem on the outside. I'm also going to baste with a long stitch over the shoulder because that gives me some workability to ease it into the curve of the garment when I get done. And then on the front of the shirt, it consists of the basic front as well as, where's my little piece here, a front yoke that will be attached here after the dart is in place. So I know a lot of times I'll mention I'm going to get the darts all put in, you know, for prep stitching. So I'm going to do the top dart, but there's a different way that I'm going to sew this dart that's down here. And usually a dart would come like this, and then it would come to a point down here, and you would sew all the way. You know, you'd fold that in and sew back to create a curve. But in this garment, I want to have a pleat in the front. So what we're going to do is we're only going to sew here, and then we're just going to stitch it and then leave the bottom part of that open and press it. So we'll do that on camera so you can see what I'm doing, because it's not a typical dart that I'm putting in the bottom, but the one at the top is a typical dart. I'm just going to bring the dart sides together and sew from the edge to the point, so it'll make a dart right there. But this one in the front we'll do on the camera together so you can see how that's done. Then on the back is going to have an inset. Oh, I'm catching some thread there. The back is going to have an inset pleat, much like on my Doctor Who coat on the back of his coat. So I'll go ahead and put a picture in frame here so you can see what that's going to look like. But in order to make that kind of a pleat that is inset yet open, if that makes sense, we have 3 different lines drawn on the pattern. The first line is going to be an actual stitching line to put the coat together, and I'm only going to sew until here. Then the dotted line is actually going to be a line that ends up being a fold line, so we'll show that when we put it together. Then the most inside line, I'm only going to sew a 1/2 inch from the top of the fabric down. Then I'm going to leave this open. Then I'm going to sew from this point down to this point. So I'm not going to sew right here, and then we'll do that on camera as well so you can see how I put that together. But that way you kind of know what the pieces look like and kind of what we're going to do for construction, and why when I come back to the camera a lot of this will already be finished. So without more chit chat and further ado, I'll switch up the camera and we'll go ahead and get to work. The pieces are all prep sewn, and now we're going to go ahead and start putting some things together so you can see in the camera. I also went ahead and put the collar together. I just went around the edge, but I haven't finished this part just because I wanted to go ahead and show that once I do that, I also trim this seam allowance down to about 1/8 of an inch just to get rid of some of the bulk of that seam allowance. So we're going to go ahead and trim that seam allowance, and then that will just need to be turned. So we'll go ahead and turn the collar here. And then I'll press that and top stitch it, and I'll also, once it's all top stitched, then I'm going to baste along the bottom edge to hold both of those sides together, and then I'm going to fold it in half and put a little notch in the center that helps me line that up with the center back when I actually put it on the garment. So now we'll go ahead and top stitch this piece, and hopefully I have the camera in a good enough spot where you can see these, and I'll try to keep my hands out of the way. I went ahead and put this little cardboard thing here because if I don't, that little light, I mean, I need it for sewing, but it makes a big glare in the camera, so I thought, well, maybe this will work. So here we go. But I had to open the casing door because it was making a big shadow on what we're sewing, and that would not be very helpful for you. So I was experimenting, making sure the cardboard wouldn't interfere with my sewing. Alright, so right now we're just going to top stitch, so I'm not going to worry about back tacking here because that will all be caught in the seam when I put it together. So I'm just going to top stitch along that edge. But trimming that seam allowance down helps get rid of a lot of that bulk that you really don't want, especially in doll clothing, because they're just tiny. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to baste, I'm just going to stitch across the bottom. I was going to baste, but it doesn't really matter. Hopefully that was nothing frightening there. So now that that collar is done and ready to go on the shirt, I'm going to also, just because sometimes the seams can be a little tiny bit different, you know, because we're people and we're going around pieces of fabric, I can tell that that edge isn't completely flush, so I'm just going to trim to make it flush, like so. And then I'll go ahead and put a tiny notch just right in the center there. So that way that notch is going to help me line that up when I go to put it onto the back. Now we're going to go ahead and do the dart in the front piece. So as I mentioned, it's not going to be a typical dart where we would start here, bring these two together, sew, and then sew to another end. So what I'm going to do is put my pin in, and this is the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm going to use the pin to bring those 2 points together. Now I'm going to start at the top of that little dart, and then I'm going to sew down to here. And so I'm going to start where that point is here on the top, and I'm going to sew to the bottom, but I'm going to leave this open. I'm not going to sew it back down again. I'm just going to leave it open. And so let's see, I might even start at the open edge just because it looks like that'll fit into my machine a little bit better. So we're going to start at that open edge, and now since I'm back tacking, sorry about my hand, I am going to back tack to secure that. I'm going to sink my needle, take a couple stitches, and back tack. And I'm going to sew up to that point and back tack again. And grab my scissors. There we go. Now we'll take a look at it on the right side. So now you can tell there's a pleat there. So once that dart is sewn in, now I'm going to lay the dart flat against itself rather than folding it to one side. So on the bust here, you can see where this dart allowance has been folded to the outside and pressed. But for this dart allowance, I'm not going to lay it to the side. I'm going to actually press it flat so that it will create the pleat on the inside of the garment like so. And then I'm going to press that, and I'll be back to the camera. Now these pleats are done for the front, so this is what it will look like on the front. And then the back has that inset pleat, which is just a continuation pressed of the one that we sewed, that little dart that we sewed. So we sewed it down this far and then pressed it flat and just continued that pleat down to the hem, which then ends up giving us this nice pleat that will be on the front of the coat or shirt dress. There we go. So that's the front pieces. Now that the front is sewn together, I'm going to go ahead and take the yoke, the front yoke, which is this little piece. Oh goodness, I got to get this so we can see it. Here we go. The little front pieces, and this will be sewn onto the, there we go, onto the front of the garment. With this is the neckline, so I'll put right sides together and sew that across the top, and then that will form the armhole here on the side. So that's going to be the armhole after I sew those on. So I'll sew those together, and then I also sewed the little pieces that are going to be the little bands that will just be sewn on for decoration on the sleeves. So I sewed from one end down around the pointed tip and back, and then you leave this open, of course, so that you can turn it. And I just took a very narrow seam. If you do a 1/4 inch, you're going to have a really, really, really skinny little band, and sometimes that can be kind of hard to turn, so I left it a little bit wider. It's up to your preference, of course. Then we'll come back and we'll work on putting together the back. We're ready to do the back in assembling the back together. So as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to sew, I've marked my fabric. So on this inside seam line, I did finish the very edge of the fabric, by the way, because that will show once the garment is finished. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to sew from here, just not quite a 1/4 inch since this was reduced 75%. So I'm just going to sew all the way down to the bottom mark. Then I'm going to sew about a 1/2 inch here, and it looks like I forgot to mark my other little spot. So let's see, we'll lay our pattern here so I can go ahead and look again where, here we go. It's going to be right about here. There we go. So I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam right here. I'll leave that open. Then I'm going to sew from here to here. I'll get that pattern out of the way. And let's see, can we see in the machine? There we go. We're kind of battling with that rainy Oregonian lighting through the windows, so I've moved a bunch of stuff around. Hopefully this will show up. I guess I'll find out for sure when I go to edit. But so we're going to come and sew all the way down to this point down here. And then I'm going to back tack. There we go. And that is the actual inside seam of the coat, or shirt dress, I guess. I keep wanting to call it a coat. Cut those threads. Now I'm going to sew that little 1/2 inch section. So pretty much what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all the way to the end. And then I'm just going to back tack back up. That way I don't have to, you know, do back tack, go down back tack when it's just a small space anyway. So now I'm going to sew from here. I'm going to back tack and sew down to this point. And here I am going to back tack. So I have more of a length here. And I'm just going to let my foot follow this previous seam and come down to the other dot and back tack and take it out. Alright, so now the next part is going to involve a turning stick as well as an iron. It's a little tiny turning stick, so you just need something very thin that can go in that seam so that when we lay this flat, we have something to press against. And that turning rod's going to help us do that, as well as kind of, get my hand out of the way. So we're going to press that down. And this we're going to act like it was sewn, even though it's not, because we still want the pleat to effectively be on the back. So we're pressing down, and my fabric is kind of a stiff choice, which maybe wasn't the best idea. So let's see, I'll probably do this. I'm going to release the stick for the top part because there is a little bit of a bend, but now you can see how that pleat is forming underneath the seam allowance on both sides. There we go, because that's been pressed down flat. And so we're going to press that, and then I'll withdraw the turning stick as I press down. Okay, so I've got my seam opened, and I have this pressed flat on this side and this pressed flat on this side. Here we go. And I'm only going to here because there is that bend in the fabric. It's not totally flat. So now I'll draw this forward here, and now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to be pressing that down so that I get a fold on either side of my seam. Looks like I took my stick out too far. There we go. Okay, press it down. And it does kind of take a while to get the hang of this, so don't let yourself get frustrated. There we go. I think I'm getting it. And then you're going to press all the way down to the very hem, so you're actually even going to be pressing the part that's not sewn yet. But if you like, just, I'll kind of show another hint. If you want to just go as far as it's sewn, then the rest you can kind of catch up after this part is pressed in. So let's go this far. Press that. Okay. Slide it up. And now you can kind of see how the fold works. And so you can just kind of do it by hand. Just give yourself a little bit of a fold this way and this way. And your fabric is kind of going to look like a slight accordion fold, but very narrow. Let's see. And then bring that all the way down to the hem. There we go. And then when we flip it over, what happens is, let me double press it here just to make sure everything's good and snug. Press this. And then there's that bend in the fabric. And then I'm going to make sure all my little accordion folds are in the proper place before I grab the iron. I just thought some of you might like a challenge, I guess. There we go. Okay. So now we've got that. And then if you kind of pull end to end, that kind of helps them lay a little nice and tight too. So then I'll press this, get those pleats together in the back. And you want to choose a fabric that will press nice for you, because sometimes if you have a fabric that doesn't want to press as well, then it ends up looking a little weird. But so now the bottom is going to look like this if it opens. Let me move my hand. There we go. Where you can tell that there's a pleat there, but you can see how that raw edge has been folded back so that the raw edge is not showing, but you have that lovely little inset pleat right here. And then on the back, ta-da, we have a little inset pleat right here in the back. So that's what that looks like. There we go. And now what we're going to do is to add the yoke of the back up here. So this piece will be sewn on. And then on this piece, I will serge across this edge because that will show in the garment. And then on this piece, as well as on the fronts, when I lift this yoke up, that seam allowance is going to be pressed upwards rather than down. Just because if you press it upwards, then it maintains the armhole, especially on the front. Now this ended up being a little bit wider than this once I have all those pleats in place, but it'll be fine. We're going to call that good. So to make sure this is centered correctly, what you can do is simply fold it in half like this and put a slight notch here. Oh, if I can do it without making a mess. And then that notch will line up with the seam. We'll sew that on, serge that edge so it's nice and finished, press it up, and then top stitch across the top. Then once I have that ready, I do have the front pieces put together. So here's what they look like. And I top stitched along the front of this edge as well. So I will be putting the fronts to the back at the shoulders, and then we will be ready to put in the collar and the facing. Now the shoulders are attached, and in both the facing pieces and the actual garment, I just press the shoulder seams open because they're going to be hidden by the inner facing. So I don't need to serge them or fold them one direction. I want as little bulk as possible, so I just open them and press them flat. Then I go ahead and I stay stitch around the neckline and clip on both this and the facing pieces. So let's see if it'll show when we open this out against the camera, so that we can kind of pull this and all those little tabs are going to separate, which basically just makes it easier to put in the collar and kind of fake your machine into thinking that you're actually going to be sewing a straight line. If you try to put that in when it's all curved, because there isn't that much curve on the collar, it's going to be really, really difficult. So here on the collar, I actually snip that as well, and I've stay stitched, you know, that when I turned it. So now I'm going to turn my garment so it's the right side here. I'm going to sandwich the collar between the right side of the garment and the right side of the facing, like this, so that when it's done and the facing turns to the inside, then that collar is going to stand up and be sewn in place between the facing and the actual garment. So when I do this, as you might remember just from other videos, I am going to start at the center, and then I'm going to pin and insert that sandwich from the center to the outside on each side. Then once I get it pinned, I check and see if I have the same amount of fabric on each end of the collar, and that's how I make sure that my collar is centered, you know, from the back to the front, and then I have the same amount of fabric on each end so that my garment will end up being finished and looking like this, so that'll be a nice finished edge. So once I get it pinned in there, then I'm going to sew from the hemline up one side of the front, around the neck, and back down the other side of the front. And I'm going to sew all those layers together, and then I'll turn it and press it and come back to the camera. Now, of course, when you're sewing, you've got all this bulk here that you're going to want to gently kind of maneuver away from your needle so that you don't end up putting in pleats. But if you're just sewing right along that seam allowance, you shouldn't have any problems. But you just kind of want to be aware of that. So a lot of times after I start going around the neck, I'll just gently kind of pull these all out so everything kind of fans out from the needle point so that I don't get anything pleated up on the actual garment. So there we go. That's our next step. And then I will come back to the camera. Okay, so before I start sewing, I've got this all pinned. I thought of something I would go ahead and throw in here and share just as you're working on things. Another point of reference, I did the center, but then the other point of reference is you can make sure that your shoulder seam on the facing matches the placement of the shoulder seam of your garment, and that'll kind of also help ensure that your collar or that your facing is in place in the correct way. And then always make sure that the collar end, which let's see if we can get it to show here, that this end of the collar is always pulled up flush with your seam allowance, because if it's not, and that is allowed to slip down, you don't want this rough raw edge of the collar poking out of your, you know, finished garment. So you want to make sure that the entire edge of that collar is up flush with this top edge of the neckline, just so that the whole thing is tucked in your seam when you go to turn it. Now this will have just barely over 1/4 of an inch from the outside edge to where that collar starts. So that's going to put my collar right at the edge, right where I wanted it in this style. And I also noticed that my facing was a little bit long, but that is no worry at all. That can be reconciled when we do the hem. So don't worry about that end being a little bit longer. What you want to make sure is that that neckline is flush and then your front edges are nice. But if you've got extra down here at the end, that's not a worry. So now that that's all in place, I'm going to go ahead and sew from the hemline up one side of the front, across the neckline, and then back down the other side of the front. Trying to keep all my things pulled flush so that I'm only sewing right along that seam line where that seam allowance is, and that I'm not going to put any pleats in my fabric, but that fabric is all pulled away from the seam line. And that takes a little bit of concentration, I'll warn you, especially if you have a fabric that's a little bit thick like this one is. So anyway, I'll go ahead and do that up and then come back to the camera and we'll see what it looks like with this much done. Here's the pieces all sewn together, and now we're going to take a quick peek here and make sure we don't have any pleats along the collar. And it looks like I have one little weird stitch here, but no pleat. There we go. So it looks like it's going to be good, and no pleats on the facing. So that looks good. So before I turn it, I'm going to go ahead and snip the corners, because that's a lot of fabric going on there. So we're just going to, and I actually don't even snip straight across. I kind of go from an angle to the corner and then down along the corner, just because it is a lot of fabric. So instead of going straight across here, let's see, I'm going to actually come up to the corner, around the corner, and then into that seam allowance. And just get some of those pieces out of the way. And then I do have some needle nose tweezers here that will help me turn it if I need it. So let's go ahead and let's see. And a lot of times too, if you kind of start with folding that seam allowance in, it'll help you make your corner a little bit nicer. So let's see if we can get that to come out. So there's that side. And let's try the other side. There we go. And I think the pattern could use a little bit more room on the yoke, but I think it'll be alright. And now this top stitching here isn't actual top stitching. It's just some of that stay stitching that I put in. And so if you have some of your stitching showing, because that was just stay stitching, all you have to do is gently lift up a thread to where you can snip it, and just go ahead and pull those up out of the way. Be careful not to poke your fabric, because you don't want to poke a hole in your fabric, but then you can just take that little thread right out. Now if you have a problem with this laying nice and flat, of course you're going to press it. The answer is more snips. And I just try to snip next to the seams that I've already sewn in the shoulder, because you don't want those shoulder seams coming apart, of course. But just snipping right up to that seam line. There's a piece that's not snipped, so I'll snip that. And the more little snips you put in, the easier it is going to be for that curve to lay nice and flat. So, and all this mess is hidden once that facing is in place, so don't let that deter you from snipping. You just want to make sure you're not snipping, you know, your seams for your threads for your seam. There we go. Let's see how that does. And then once that's snipped, there we go. See how much better that's gonna lay? So yeah, the trick there is lots of snips, especially with a curve that is this small. So let's go ahead and actually put this in place, because this is a very tiny little neckline, but there's our collar put in. And then, like I say, I could have used more distance on the yoke. I noticed that when I was going around. I thought, that's not much room, but I think it'll still look nice because it is the same on both sides. So now I'm going to press that flat, and I'm going to top stitch, but not yet. But I am going to press it, and I'm going to go ahead and cut off what's the excess for that front facing and press that flat. Just when you're pressing your facing, be sure you don't, you know, put a rumple in these pretty pleats that you've added, because you want to have them nice and neat when you press that. So just be careful you don't catch your iron and get that crooked. So the next thing I'm going to do is to once again stay stitch around the armhole, and then I'm going to put in my sleeves with right sides together. I'm going to match the tip of the shoulder, and to do that I'll simply fold the sleeve in half and add a little snip here. It's like the easiest way to find your center and not have it move. If you use a pin, sometimes they just get in your way. So I'm going to match the center to the shoulder seam, and then I'm going to ease this in around and then start at the outside edges and kind of work my way up on each side. Now, once again, you can snip in the armhole to try to make that straight like we did in the neckline. Also, if you're new to sewing, when you baste this edge of the sleeve on the shoulder sleeve. Give yourself some thread here. Don't cut your threads right to the edge of your fabric, because then as you get it to where you want it, you want to keep fabric or thread there so that it doesn't slide back out, and then you don't have anything holding it in place because the thread's gone because you snipped it. So just keep your threads along until the sleeve is actually placed into the sleeve hole, and then once it's all secure, then trim all your threads at one time. But I'm going to go ahead and stay stitch here and snip to the seam, and then I'm going to go ahead and inset my sleeve simply by, like I say, connecting the center and then easing this up. And there will be some puff on this sleeve, which is okay, and just evening out those gathers so that this top edge is attached to that. So I'm going to do that on both sides, and then I'll come back to the camera. Now, essentially all the pieces are attached to our garment, and these pieces, you just want to be careful when we actually put the sleeve together that you don't get it bent, and catch it in the seam. But now what we're going to do is turn the garment inside out and make sure this is out of the way. And if you want, you can kind of fold it and clip it or pin it just to keep it out of the way. So we're going to start at the hem of the sleeve and sew to the underarm with all the seam allowance from the sleeve going towards the sleeve, and then sew down the side on each side, and that will put the garment completely together. And then it's just working on the hem. The only thing that I noticed that I probably didn't plan correctly for is that the facing goes in farther than the pleat, and I want the pleat to be able to fall free. So probably when I turn that facing up so that I have a nice hem like so, and I fold this. Usually I will sew a seam, but I don't want that facing to interfere with the fold of my little pleat, so I'll probably only tack it as far as like right here so that that pleat still can fold free, and then I might actually take this and fold it up just so that it's out of the way, but it still gives me a nice facing inside, and then my pleat will be able to go ahead and hang correctly. And then I will serge this edge before I hem it, just so that when I turn it up and hem it, it'll be nice and finished. And once it's hemmed, I will just repress those pleats into place. But I don't want a bunch of bulk on the fold of the pleat, so I'll probably have to do a little bit of adjusting to my facing so that it hangs nice, but it's up out of the way. So I'll have to kind of figure that out. But other than that, that's what we need to do to finish our little coat. So I'll do that. And then to put the leggings together, let's grab our leggings pieces. This is fairly simple in that all you need to do is hem the legs, hem the bottom, then sew the legs together, inseams together on this piece and inseams together on this piece. Then you turn one right side out and one inside out, and then funnel one down the other so that, let's see, and I can't remember how you do it, just so that you end up with right sides together on the crotch line, and then you just sew the crotch from one end and around to the other one. Then go ahead and turn in the casing and put in elastic. So that's all there is to the leggings. It's just these two pieces. So they go together pretty quickly. So I'll probably do that and show it, but I'll speed it up so that it goes pretty quickly, just because there's not much to it. So we'll do that, and that should get our little outfit put together so we can model it on our doll. And here is the finished outfit. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out. I went ahead and put, let's see if we can get a close-up here. I had some little rose shaped buttons, and I kind of wanted the coat just to keep that monochrome look, just one color red, and then use different textures. So I thought instead of flat buttons, we'd just have some fun with these little rose, let's see if I can get to where it'll focus, these little rose buttons. There we go. And then the little scarf, I just have it clipped with one of those little gem hair clips. So there's what that looks like. The leggings are long on her, but I want to go ahead and try them on an Evangeline and see how they fit, and also how the length would be. So you can kind of see that they're kind of bunched up there at the end, but it's not a bad look, and you know, kind of 80s style, I guess. So what we'll do is, let's go ahead and move her hair. Let's see if I can hold the camera and still move her hair out of the way so we can see the back of the coat. So here's the little inset pleat, and then if it's going to be with leggings, you could feasibly sew this, you know, only to here, and then have all of this open. But because it is a shirt dress, and it wouldn't always, sorry about that, wouldn't always have leggings with it, then if it was just hose, you might want that extra length. I just didn't want this to be too far, you know, up, even with her hiney. If it's going to be a dress, it needs to be below. You know, just keeping things there. So anyway, and yeah, and then the little puff sleeves, we'll put her hair back over here. Turned out really cute. So there we go. We'll go ahead and unclip this. If I can find the, there we go. Take the scarf off so we can see the collar. So it's got the little stand-up collar, and it fits around her neck really well. So all in all, yes, very pleased with how it turned out. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the original pattern was drafted for the SD sized Hugh, who is very busty, and these Ellowyne dolls are not. So there is a little room in here, so you could either, I imagine, take less of a dart, maybe, so it doesn't, you know, gives quite that forward bust, but, or you could just stick a little tissue in there. Like old grade school trick. And yeah, so I'm curious. I'm going to try this on Evangeline and see how it fits her, because she is quite a bit taller, and then we'll go ahead and throw her on the camera as well. Not throw her on the camera, but you know, show what she looks like with this outfit and see how it fits her. I'm not sure if the front will close, but we'll give it a try. So thank you, Prudence, and we'll move on to Evangeline. And here is Evangeline. And in truth, the outfit looks like it was designed for her. It fits her perfectly. I'm very, well, and she's got all this hair. All right, let's move the hair. So yeah, the length is good. It's, the ankles are a little narrow, so the pant leg doesn't fall like all the way down over her shoe, just because they're a little bit narrow at the ankle. But if you widen that up a little bit, the length would fall a little more naturally, and it would probably be perfect. But yeah, the sleeve length is good. Yeah, so wow. Yeah, it looks good. And I'm tickled because I haven't sewn for Evangeline in quite a while. I've just had so many other projects. So there we go. So their little MSD outfit is actually perfect for Evangeline, so I should have built it as such, but I didn't know. I didn't know it would fit her, so I'm very tickled about that. And yeah, so either way, if you want to make it work for the Ellowyne or Evangeline, it will. And probably any dolls that are similar in size, you can kind of take your doll's measurements and tweak where you need to. So there we go. There is Evangeline signing off, saying happy sewing, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.